For decades, Hollywood stuck to the traditional formula. Monsters were monsters, and heroes were shiny, perfect, and definitely not green. But then DreamWorks came along and asked, what if the monster was the hero? With pop culture references and a big green guy who couldn't care less about your happily ever after, Shrek turned fairy tales on their head. And it worked. And this shift didn't stop with DreamWorks. Once audiences proved they could love a misunderstood monster, the floodgates opened. From Gru's villain glow-up to Dracula's awkward dad jokes, monsters have been getting the redemption arc they didn't know they needed. This is the DreamWorks Effect. It's the ultimate fairy tale remix, and it changed how we see monsters forever. But how did we get here? And what made DreamWorks think that monsters deserved a second chance? To understand that, we have to go back to a time when ogres weren't always misunderstood anti-heroes. In fact, in old folklore, they were straight-up nightmare fuel. Forget awkward swamp baths. The ogres of legend weren't into self-care. They were into human care, specifically caring about how humans tasted. In European folklore, ogres were known for their giant appetites and zero table manners. If you were a lost traveler or an unlucky villager, you were dinner, and the main course, often children, because nothing says folklore fun like a horrifying cautionary tale. And they weren't shy about it either. No sneaky Hansel and Gretel witch in the oven plot. No, ogres were more of a why waste time, straight to the munching kind of crowd. One of the most infamous ogres comes from Charles Perrault's Tales, the same guy who gave us Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty. But in his version of Puss in Boots, the fancy feline wasn't just outsmarting some regular landlord. He was dealing with a literal monster. This ogre wasn't just into fine dining, he was a shapeshifter. One minute he's a hulking giant, the next a roaring lion. Classic, look what I can do, move. Pretty intimidating, right? But Puss, being the ultimate hustler, dared him to prove his skills by transforming into something small. A mouse. Spoiler alert, that was the ogre's final trick. One chomp later, and let's just say the ogre didn't make it to dessert. And of course, there's the classic Jack and the Beanstalk, the fee-fi-fo-fum chant. Not just for dramatic effect, it's a literal threat. The giant up in the clouds wasn't just grumpy, he was a man-eating monster who planned to grind Jack's bones into bread, smelling humans from a mile away like they were walking chicken nuggets. Suddenly, climbing a beanstalk seems like a pretty terrible idea. So, the next time someone tells you ogres are just misunderstood swamp dwellers, remember their original gig: terrifying children, eating peasants, and proving that sometimes the monsters weren't just in your imagination. They were the bedtime stories your ancestors thought were appropriate for kids. Sweet dreams. Fast forward centuries later, and something changed. The ogre got a PR team, and they worked overtime. Ogres, they weren't the villains of the story. They were the ones we rooted for. In 2001, DreamWorks didn't just poke fun at fairy tales. They drop-kicked them into a muddy swamp. Forget glass slippers and true love's kiss. This was a world where the ogre was the good guy. The princess threw punches and the knight in shining armor. Well, he was about 4 feet tall and had major short king energy.
Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make.
While Disney had magical castles and talking animals, DreamWorks gave us ogre hygiene jokes and a fire soundtrack. And guess what? It worked! In 2001, DreamWorks Animation released Shrek, which was inspired by a 1990 fairy tale picture book of the same name, written by William Steig. The original book tells the story of a grumpy, ugly ogre named Shrek who goes on a journey to find a princess. DreamWorks loosely took the concept and turned it into a film that would forever change the landscape of animated movies. Unlike the polished fairy tale adaptations that dominated the box office, Shrek was a direct challenge to the traditional narrative. It took the elegant fantasy worlds popularized by Disney and twisted them into something hilariously self-aware, biting and refreshingly unconventional. At its core, Shrek was a parody. DreamWorks took aim at the tropes of the genre: the noble prince, the damsel in distress, and the wicked monster, and turned them upside down. Shrek wasn't just a parody, it was a middle finger to the fairy tale status quo. And let's be honest, the fact that it won the first ever Oscar for Best Animated Feature, that's the ultimate happily ever after. But for all the jokes and talking donkeys, Shrek hit different. This wasn't a hero carved out of marble. He was a big green guy who just wanted people to leave him alone, and who hasn't wanted to build a metaphorical swamp and tell the world to back off. DreamWorks' approach wasn't accidental. Jeffrey Katzenberg, co-founder of DreamWorks and a former Disney executive, had a famously tense departure from Disney. Many speculate that Shrek served as a not-so-subtle jab at Disney's picture-perfect worlds. Enter Lord Farquaad. The guy had a jawline sharper than his moral compass. He was obsessed with perfection. But the real irony, the most monstrous thing about Farquaad, was his personality. The villainous Lord Farquaad, with his short stature and authoritarian tendencies, was widely rumored to be a caricature of Disney CEO Michael Eisner. Even Farquaad's theme park kingdom, Duloc, mirrored the ultra-clean, overly artificial aesthetic of Disneyland. In Shrek, everything that would traditionally be seen as ugly or undesirable is celebrated. Meanwhile, Farquaad, the symbol of superficial perfection, is the true monster.
You're a monster!
Unlike Disney's flawless princes and princesses, Shrek is a character full of flaws. He's grumpy, sarcastic, and prefers solitude. But beneath the layers of sarcasm and self-loathing, there's a vulnerability that audiences connected with. He struggles with self-acceptance, believing that his appearance makes him unworthy of love or friendship. His relationship with Donkey, a fast-talking, relentlessly optimistic sidekick, provides comedic relief while also exploring themes of companionship. Fiona's arc also subverts expectations. A princess who ultimately chooses to remain an ogre rather than conform to the traditional beauty standards imposed on her. She broke the princess must be pretty rule, like it was a cursed spell. Love wasn't about looks, it was about accepting your true self, even if that self had green skin and no manners. Shrek didn't just break the mold, he shattered it. And speaking of creatures that have evolved, these days, trolls are basically glittery pop stars with questionable hair choices. Between Frozen's mystical matchmakers and trolls literally throwing karaoke parties, it's easy to forget that trolls weren't always the life of the party. In fact, the original trolls would have sooner tossed you off a mountain than invited you to a dance party. Because in Scandinavian folklore, trolls weren't here to harmonize. They were here to haunt. Trolls were believed to lurk in the mountains, forests, and caves of Norway and Sweden. And no, they weren't collecting shiny gems. These guys were massive, ugly, and dangerously unpredictable. If you stumbled across one, you had two options: run or hope they mistook you for a boulder. They weren't just ugly for the sake of it, though. The monstrous appearance of trolls often symbolized the untamed, dangerous forces of nature. But trolls weren't just content with looming in the shadows. They had a pretty terrifying reputation for stealing children and devouring livestock. Farmers would wake up to find their sheep mysteriously missing. Luckily, trolls had one fatal weakness: sunlight. In many stories, the second they were hit by the morning rays, they turned to stone. Not ideal if you're a nocturnal menace with a night shift lifestyle. Some people believe that jagged rocks and strange stone formations in Scandinavia are actually petrified trolls, frozen mid-lumber. But if there's one troll who made it into bedtime story history, it's the guy from Three Billy Goats Gruff. You know the one, hanging out under the bridge like a medieval toll booth operator, demanding payment in goat currency. But here's the twist. This wasn't just a silly story about goats and a troll with boundary issues. It was actually a cautionary tale. In ancient times, bridges were often rickety, unstable, and dangerous. Telling kids a monstrous troll lived underneath was an effective way to keep them from wandering too far and tumbling into a river. The stories of terrifying trolls still echo in folklore. And the next time you're hiking through a misty mountain pass or crossing an old wooden bridge, maybe think twice before trip-trapping across. Fast forward to 2016, and DreamWorks now decided to give trolls the ultimate makeover. Trolls weren't just the monsters under the bridge anymore. Instead, we got sentient glitter bombs with a passion for karaoke. But the trolls glow-up wasn't entirely DreamWorks' doing. These little guys had already been iconic. Remember the troll dolls, those funky-haired figurines from the 60s? DreamWorks took that chaotic energy and cranked it up. Add some sequins, slap on a banger soundtrack, and you've got yourself a billion-dollar franchise. DreamWorks knew the key to troll domination: pop music. Every dance-off, every glitter explosion, powered by chart toppers and songs stuck in your head for days as you pretended not to sing in the shower. No more lurking in the shadows. DreamWorks trolls are basically serotonin in animated form. So how did DreamWorks manage to turn monsters into the most lovable characters in animation? Simple. They stopped taking fairy tales so seriously, and it worked. While Disney gave us noble knights, DreamWorks handed us dad jokes, talking donkeys, and a green ogre who makes hygiene optional. And when it came to trolls, forget the whole dark forest menace vibe. DreamWorks replaced it with spontaneous dance-offs and a color palette that looks like Lisa Frank exploded. But it wasn't all jokes. Beneath the sarcasm and glitter, DreamWorks gave these monsters real struggles. Shrek wrestled with self-acceptance. Poppy fought to stay happy when the world wasn't. Even the grumpiest troll in town had a heartbreak behind the scowl. Turns out monsters are a lot more human than we thought. And then there were the villains. DreamWorks flipped the script. Prince Charming is a good example. They set him up as the perfect prince on paper, rich, attractive, and seemingly brave. But the twist is that he's entitled, manipulative, and frankly, a bit pathetic. His entire purpose revolves around fulfilling his mother's twisted ambitions. And unlike traditional princes who are driven by noble deeds, Charming's biggest motivation is maintaining the illusion of his own perfection. While Lord Farquaad had a massive ego, Prince Charming went for the classic Golden Mama's Boy persona. But peel back the royal exterior, and you've got a guy whose most impressive achievement is keeping his hair that perfect under all that armor. While Disney perfected the art of timeless fairy tales with characters like Elsa and Moana, DreamWorks thrived on poking fun at the genre. But both studios tackled the same question: what makes a hero? Frozen's Elsa learned to let it go. Shrek, he let it slide. Two very different vibes, both iconic. DreamWorks' monster glow-up set a trend. Suddenly, being a lovable outcast was in. Movies like Despicable Me and Hotel Transylvania embraced the monster as the hero narrative. Even Disney had to adapt, with films like Encanto celebrating imperfect heroes. In a world of Disney princesses and noble knights, DreamWorks dared to ask, what if the monster was the good guy? DreamWorks didn't just change how we see trolls and ogres. They changed the whole monster playbook. Being a little weird wasn't just okay, it was the main event. Studios caught on quick. Villains got redemption arcs. Quirky misfits became the stars. DreamWorks took the most monstrous creatures of folklore and turned them into party icons. Even now they're spreading glitter and good vibes, one pop cover at a time. The DreamWorks Effect proved that monsters don't have to be scary. They can be funny, lovable, and even relatable. Because sometimes the best heroes aren't the ones who look perfect. They're the ones who embrace who they are, flaws and all. If you made it this far, you're basically royalty in the kingdom of far, far away. So like, subscribe, and let me know your favorite Shrek character in the comments. Thanks for watching.